So those are the papers and things we're talking about, and it's just a quick run through. You can go away and read them if you're interested, but this was just a presentation to try and highlight some of these things. First one, whole life cost. Out there in the industry, everybody is telling us we should be designing for, procuring for whole life cost. Is that true? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Are we doing it? To what extent are we doing it? So what we basically, and most of us would know that any business, if they're buying an asset, they should be looking at whole life cost rather than just the capex, capital cost of that thing. I work for Mott, MacDonald, big designer. We can always design for whole life cost. We can do optioneering, make the best option for the lowest whole life cost. It's totally relevant, of course, to what we were talking about with Connect Plus this morning. So various organisations, the government procurement advice is specifically asking us to procure on whole life cost. And in some cases, if a client actually doesn't want to operate the thing, it might be best to go one stage further and get the contractor to design and build and operate. And we'll come on to that a bit later. But quite often the employer doesn't want to go that far, they want to operate it themselves. So surely if we do design and build, we should be giving the contractor the opportunity to innovate and come up with the best whole life cost solution, surely. So simple example, I'm a water engineer by background, so let's say we're just trying to get some water up from a river. We're going to need an intake, a pumping station, some pipelines and a reservoir. Simple project. Good old-fashioned civil engineering, proper stuff. Design, first off, is a continuum. You know JCT has a D&B contract and an employer design contract. Rubbish, because all contracts are somewhere in between. We need to recognise that. So for my previous example, we've got a capacity requirement of a certain metre cubes a day, water up to the tank. Someone's got to do a plan of the route. Someone's got to decide, do we want one pipe or two? What diameter pipes? What pipe material? What capacity of pump station? Let's do a long section for this pipe. Exact details of where each bit's going to go, chambers and valves, structural design. We're eventually going to end up where I started out with Mott MacDonald 26 years ago, which was doing reinforcing detailing to BS 800 something, if you remember all those things a long while ago. So the whole design is a continuum. And the ECC, as you all know, we have to tell the contractor exactly how much he's going to have to design for us. We all know that. Whole life cost, what is it? Capital cost, yes. A way of talking about is facilities management costs and then disposal costs for the whole life of this asset. The FM costs, broken down, I'm not quite sure where I got this from, to be honest, but there's different ways to describe it, but this works for me. Operating, planned preventive maintenance, reactive maintenance, replacement. That's what the FM's got to do. So if we're going to really select on whole life cost, we should be building these things in as much as we can into our evaluation mechanism when we come to tender. How can the employer get lowest whole life costs? Well, early contractor involvement we've heard about a few times. Let's have a chat, let's work out, let's look at different options in that early contractor involvement stage. Great idea. But when we've done all that, how do we get the contractor to guarantee the whole life cost that he's promised us? If we do capital costs, we're used to the contractor guaranteeing the capex. It's called a prices, it's called a lump sum or a target. How do we get him to guarantee the OPEX? It's all very simple in NEC. That whole life cost, those three elements, you can see I'm trying to push on fairly fast here, so sorry if I'm going too fast. Capital cost is the prices, ECC the prices, and we can take that further. I've done that on a current job, DBO, not NEC unfortunately, because it's in Bangladesh and we're not quite ready for NEC in Bangladesh. But if it's a 5-year construction period, then the cash flow curve is actually a significant contributor to the overall whole life cost. Where are we spending the money in that 5 years? When it comes to the FM costs, I think we can break down that into things where the FM is just not affected by the contractor's design. Remember, because we might have done quite a lot of the design already. And there'll be some things which are directly affected by the contractor's design. Just a way of structuring to think about it. Of those things that are affected by the contractor's design, some of them can actually be tested, proven in a test for completion under your ECC contract. Stuff that the contractor is affected by his design but can't be directly proven, in ECC we can force the contractor to do it that way by putting it in the works information for the contractor's design. Once he's promised to do it, if it's in that part of the document, he's got to do it. If he says he's going to use fancy pipelines with lovely long life, you make sure that goes into the works information provided by the contractor. Some things can actually be made subject to specific performance guarantees, and then we can use option X17, performance damages, which I don't think is used very often in the industry. Show of hands, how many people have had X17 in their contracts? 2, 3 out of quite a few. Crazy. So, whole life contributors for this pipeline, CapEx for everything, simple, price for doing the job. Promise pipeline, I've just said, we'll put that in the works information. Let's have a guaranteed power consumption per metre cubed for the pump station and the pipeline combo, which the contractor has designed for us. And we'll select the bidder based on that whole life cost, based on that guaranteed power consumption. Because in this job, the power consumption is a significant contributor to the whole life cost of the project. X17, straight out of the contract, that's what it says. Let you read it. Very simple. Full stop. Not difficult, simple sentence. So we get the guarantee from the contractor of how much he's going to use, this example, kilowatt hours per cubic metre, stated into the works information for the contractor's design, build it into the contract, simple, point to that as the guaranteed performance level from our contract data, simple. When it actually happens, if he's guaranteed that much and he comes in at that much, if he hasn't fixed it by the defects date, guess what? It's a defect because he's promised the little box and it's come out bigger. That's a defect. He can try and correct that defect. He's got the opportunity to correct it. He can change stuff to improve the performance. He might be doing a deal to get the defect accepted under NEC, standard clause. If not, the contractor has, first off, he's got a right to pay his way out, or if he hasn't done it by the defects date, you as the employer, project manager, will take the money away because his thing consumed more power than he promised. Very simple. Now in the building sector, there's a whole load of talk about whole life cost of buildings. Let's have a hospital which is cheap to heat, for example. It's really difficult to measure that, but if we can start moving towards those things that we can measure, we can actually get guaranteed. This is exactly the same principle in FIDIC, I said there were ICME contracts. Some of you might have seen ICME contracts, performance guarantees, the same principles there in FIDIC. It's there in NEC. Nothing I've said in the last 10 slides is anything new. It's just that we don't think about using it often enough, I'm arguing. Go a bit further, you're going to need to have details for the testing. Who's going to do the testing? Good point, and interesting, like early warning, some of the discussion, everything seems a bit negative. Performance damages. NEC doesn't have anything for a performance bonus. If he comes in with something which actually outperforms his guarantee, why don't we pay him some more money? Very simple Z clause to do that, no problem at all. But even so, we've still got a separate CapEx and a separate OpEx guarantee. Surely it's not rocket science for you guys to write a Z clause to stick those together. And then we're not guaranteeing CapEx, we're actually guaranteeing whole life cost. Properly incentivizing the bidders to come up with the right answer, and then properly incentivizing the contractor through the design process to improve upon it. Any rocket science in there? No? Simple? Let's do it. Okay, one step beyond. I don't know how we're doing on time. Design, build, operate. Anybody been involved in a DBO project? Few hands up. NEC or otherwise? FIDIC? Yeah. Yes, sorry. I've got one of those going on at the moment. So Barry and I, has Barry come in yet? He's over there, good man. Barry and I said, well, why can't we do it with NEC? So easy. And we got that published. And while I'm there, a bit of a plug for Management, Procurement and Law, ICE's Management, Procurement and Law. They do some good stuff. They have some quite good papers here and there, I like to think. There was some good stuff in just the last edition on a couple of specific NEC issues. Good stuff. DBO basics. We'll pay the guy for operating, but we'll pay him for constructing as well. So if it were just an operations contract, we'd just have the blue line, could be term service contract. But DBO, we want to pay him for constructing a thing, and then we'll pay him for providing a service. It's the basic concept of DBO. Basics, why? Because the contractor then is really, really incentivized to give a damn about the whole life cost, which is exactly where we were talking about earlier, again, with the Connect Plus. There's a nice little link with what we had this morning. Employer pays for D&B, no contractor finance. Simple. We did this with FIDIC, 1998, two-stage contract. D&B FIDIC, orange at the time, and then completely bastardized D&B for the operation stage because there isn't a FIDIC operations contract. That was developed and later become the standard for doing wastewater treatments all across Ireland for the last 10 years. Because Ireland, without looking at plug here, got an awful lot of money from the EU, so he didn't need project finance. It's not trying to sort the vote out for later on, don't worry. So DBO basics, we've got FIDIC Gold Book, which is probably what gentleman over there is using. Still not much used. It's got no standard payment mechanisms. It's got no performance deductions. So if you're going to use FIDIC, you're going to have quite a lot of drafting to do anyway. And anyway, surely we can do it better. We've got a nice helpful audience that are going to say, yes, Richard, yes. So surely we can have a single form of agreement pointing to the service, term service contract, service information, but there's stuff to build first. Guess what? We can use the ECC. So bloody obvious, it's hardly worth the slide, is it, for you guys, because you understand this stuff, I hope. Standard documents, stuck together with one single form of agreement. We might have works information provided by the contractor, no problem. General issues for DBO, we might find ourselves wanting to tweak the risk allocation. Quite often the contractor, the client, might want to push more ground risk on the contractor, typical. If we do in that model, we've got two different models of defined cost, because defined cost is the same word, but different definition in TSC to ECC. You might want to join those together. Change in law is a big issue on long-term contracts. That might need a bit of legal tweaking. We can do that, simple. Joint several liability. Very often, we talked about JVs a minute ago. Typically, the DBO will be a joint venture, and you'll need a one-liner in the Z clause about joint ventures. Not a problem. We do it anyway for D&B. Inflation, long-term contracts, need to seriously look at inflation. On most big projects that I'm involved in, the power inflation risk is very, very critical, and that has to be dealt with separately. We can do that. Little tweak to X1. Simple. Insurances are hard. I'm not an insurance specialist. Big DBO contract, you're going to have to get an insurance specialist in to look to see whether NEC is right for you. Dispute resolution, internationally, where most DBOs come up, they don't like adjudication. That might need a tweak, but we can tweak that, very simple. Service issues, so in the O&M issues, obviously we define our service requirements as we would do for a term service contract. That's the critical thing. What do we actually need? Price list to pay for it, simple. Performance deductions, talked about. Asset replacement fund is different. That's not in the TSC. We might need a mechanism to pay specifically for pre-planned asset replacement. I'm not going to be humble here. NEC might steal the mechanism from FIDIC. Shock horror. Consents is a big issue on some jobs. That's going to need specific issue. Who's going to have to get the consent to put the wastewater in the river? Is that the client or is that the contractor? These are some of the specific things that come because it's a DBO issue, not just a term service contract. Employment provisions, TUPE type stuff. NEC doesn't deal with that. That's a hole in the term service contract already. That's going to need looking at. So I'm not saying DBO is there already. I'm trying to get across is that it's not too much of a leap from what we have now to taking a DBO contract together. I'm going to have to flick through these pretty quick. If you want it more interesting, obviously go away and read the paper if you're interested. D&B, so this is now the works information. The top level of performance requirements is give me something that can meet the service requirements. So you're going to point to the service requirements from the top level of your works information and then go down and give more detail. Consents again, physical condition risk might need playing with. Existing assets, site information, who's taking the risk. That might need more specific attention for a big DBO contract. Payment though, we want to pay the contractor to bill it. Oh, guess what? We've got section 5. It's probably going to be option A, lump sum, ECC option A. Change control. If the client's stupid enough to start changing things, joke, then of course that might have a knock-on effect on the cost of operating as well as the cost of building the works. That's about one line change in 63.1 in the contract. Simple. Cut-off date, most of these jobs have an absolute termination right for the employer if the contractor's X months beyond the completion date. Simple one-liner. Simple, we can do it. Challenging, but if you guys need DBO, then I think we should be showing that we can start with NEC. But we will need some incisive Z clauses. I was lucky enough to be a part of a team with Peter Higgins and Rob Gerrard working for NEC, developing DBO contract for the Asian Development Bank, which was last year, a couple of years ago. ADB, of course, it's just gone in a black hole. I'd love to say the ADB is going to start using this around the world, not just yet. But at the end of that, we had less than 2 pages of Z clauses to stitch this lot together. How am I doing for time?
Very well.
Very well. And now for something a little more radical. Because that was all simple, wasn't it? MPV, it's all there in the contract already. DBO, A plus B equals DBO, simple. Now we're going further. Anybody here been involved in project finance deals? Oh dear, 2, 3, 4, 5, few. What do you think of project finance deals in terms of the project agreement generally drafting thereof? Oh God. And Sarah? Horrendous. Brilliant. That's roughly where I come. I wrote this paper because I'm passionate about the NEC and because I've spent time working on PPP, project finance deals, in the water sector, driven by the lawyers, God bless them. So we wrote the article. Barry, over there, good man. And because I just like a bit of PR and I've got an NEC ego, we redrafted it and got it sent out through Infrastructure Intelligence as a little bit of an easier to read article. And I'm very chuffed that last year it's just been voted as MPL's paper of the year for last year, which we're quite chuffed about. So happy. Good news about that is that you can have it for free now, because apparently if it's good, you can have it for free. A bit strange. Not a particularly good business model, perhaps, I don't know. What do you think, Seymour? Oh, sorry. So the basics of DBFO, so just to get your language here, design, build, operate, DBO, design, build, finance, operate, is the same as project finance, as we talk about, project finance deals, is the same as 90% of what we call PPP, public-private partnership. It's basically design, build, finance, and operate. So in this case, that's what we have for DBO. That was 5 minutes ago. Now we're not going to pay the guy for construction. We're only going to pay him when he's providing a service. And the difference between the two monies there is the fact that you've got to pay him back the mortgage. He's had to go out and rent some money to build the assets to provide the service. That's DBFO. That's PFI. More acronyms. It's all the same thing. Project finance equals DBFO equals P. It's the same story. Whether you think it's a good idea or not is another story, but let's not try and do the philosophy here. The important thing is as nil during the construction phase. If you don't know, basically we have a DBFO agreement. It's typically called a project agreement between employer and a contractor. The contractor is typically called the project company. Project company passes on all the risk to an EPC contractor to go and build it, to an O&M contractor to operate it. That's the way the world works. He has to get some money, loan agreement from a lender, and there's a thing called a direct agreement which allows the lenders to step in and have a chance of getting their money back if the project company fails miserably to meet the requirements of the project agreement. That's a summary. We'll go to a lawyer for a better one, Sarah, but that's not far off, is it? So DBFO, they're generally bespoke and very complex. These are big deals to make it worth doing this sort of thing. And they're generally developed by the lawyers, God bless them. Where do the lawyers start for their next DBFO contract? The last one. And they changed the footer. The fact that it was in a power sector and we're now doing water or railways doesn't seem to trouble them. So they're all bespoke. Huge transaction costs to get them set up, and often years to achieve so-called financial close, which is the doing of the deal. Years, literally years. To be fair, over time, something a bit closer to a standard often develops. There's more detail about that in the paper. The UK government had something which they called something close to a standard to be used in accommodation projects across the UK. And my colleagues in Mott, we're doing stuff in Canada, we're doing stuff in Turkey, and there is a rolling programme. If you've got a load of hospitals in Turkey, which we have, of course, we get to something close to a standard document. Fundamentally, though, brilliant bit of equations there. Look, we had equations earlier, didn't we? Sorry, check the equation. I'm looking for the bullet point to point. DBFO equals DBO plus F. Okay? Don't let the lawyers and the financiers tell you it makes it so much more complicated, because I don't believe them. There must be a better way. Do I need to say anything about those? No. You know all that, don't you? You can present on all that. You do the training in your organisations. That's great. This is why we should be using a sensible contract to do DBFO. And I haven't said, but worldwide, the DBFO market is mega millions. It is the way that governments are delivering infrastructure across all sectors, across all countries. This is the way forward. But how is it really different from DBO? And I started this paper about 4 years ago, sitting in a Russian hotel room, reading through my Russian, sorry, it was in English, but for a Russian project, for a project finance deal, and reading through the project agreement and trying to find out what was actually to do with finance. Because most of it is DBO. There's a bit of F. Okay, Mr. Contractor, you really ought to go and get some money for me. 2 lines? There's conditions precedent. The contract doesn't come into place until X, Y, Z's in place. Sarah, 4 lines? The DBFO contractor, because he's got lenders involved, he has to pass near enough all the risk through to his subcontractors. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a standard subcontract that already did that? Just a thought. And if we don't want compensation events, 60.1, delete this one, that one. Weather, physical conditions, simple. We have a complex payment mechanism in most DBO contracts, DBFO contracts, very complex. Your PwCs and these fancy characters will come up with pages of, you know, those fancy sigmas and all sorts of stuff all over there. But fundamentally, you build that into Section 5. Payment is as per Annex X. You need a financial model. And in the financial model, this might come on the next slide, I don't know, but in the financial model, basically we're saying the bidder says, I'm going to have an internal rate of return of X%. That's my bid. So if you go and change things in a DBFO job, they're normally structured such that the change is such that the bidder, after the change, has the same internal rate of return. You know 63.1, contractor gets compensated defined cost. In the same way, all he's got to do is get compensated to make sure his internal rate of return stays the same. Not too hard, surely. Again, as per the DBO, if we were to change if there is going to be change, we have a compensation process. And it's not, the process will be the same. The rules for evaluating it will be based on that, keeping the internal rate of return the same as it was at the bid stage. Yes, we have to have somebody independent to come in and do the financial model and audit the financial model. 6 lines. Refinancing. Oh, they love that. The finance boys, they love that. But that's nothing to do with DBO. It's nothing to do with D&B. It's nothing to do with our construction world. Let them go and write some text on refinancing. Separate schedule. Termination. If you've ever been on a project finance deal, you wouldn't believe the amount of man hours spent discussing the termination provisions. But guess what? NEC's got fairly straightforward provision for termination. It's got at least a structure for it, and we can work within that. Disputes, again, maybe we don't go straight to adjudication, maybe we have a different dispute resolution panel or whatever, but easy to do. All that, I'm challenging you, could be dealt with by relatively straightforward Z clauses. So we have some Z clauses for DBO, and then we have a little bit more for the F. Other benefits, guess what? We've got a standard contract, so very expensive advisors can spend time talking about very detailed project-specific stuff. I've been in these meetings where people are arguing, you've got 10 people around the room, each paid £1,000 a day, trying to work out what a program means. and defining a new concept. It's called a change event. Anybody been there? It's frustrating as hell, which is why I'm stood up here. NEC, as we know, drives collaboration, subject to behavioural science. And I can't say that anymore, can I? Because it's no, never mind, don't worry. Radically, on those long-term operational contracts, you're getting into bed with somebody, so to speak, for a 30-year period, and yet you're setting up normally to be effectively lump sum for providing the service, which is totally adversarial. Maybe you go to a target contract option for that downstream service provision. Trying to guess some of the concerns for funders. They might be worried about the project manager having just too much to do under an ECC contract or a service manager on a term service contract. But if there's change, you need somebody to manage it. Design acceptance is a big issue under NEC, but under PFI, project finance. But under ECC, it's clear. And if you don't want to see stuff for acceptance, you don't ask for it. 21.2. It's already there in our contracts. Timescales too tight? Okay. If it's a multi-mega £1 million project finance deal, maybe assessing a quote in a couple of weeks is a bit much for a project manager. Clause 62.3, change 2 to 2 months. Whatever. Fear. Back to our previous, I didn't realise I was going to link quite so well here. But we know in the UK it took 20 years to get rid of ICE 6. So to get the project finance market to open their eyes and see something different is going to take a fair bit of time. And NEC, of course, is completely unknown in the international PPP market. And that's what it ends up like. Same picture, Z clauses for DBO, Z clauses for the F. Are there some vested interests acting against this? Any thoughts? Just a thought. People don't like standardisation because they pay for non-standard. But it's possible. Grateful for your thoughts. And there's some bedtime reading on the slides for later, but not just now. Any thoughts? Possible?
Yeah. It's perhaps one of the blockers, the lack of case law around NEC. And so just wonder if one of the blockers, perhaps particularly for sort of people overseas investors, whether there's a lack of NEC case law, and how do we unlock adjudicators' thoughts and make them more?
Well, that's obviously a wider issue, and I agree totally. We should be doing whatever we can as a community to get lessons learned from adjudications out. But as you know, we've been joking about this for years, haven't we, doing training. There's very little case law, but the lawyers still say we can't use the contract because it's got no case law, which is barking. But that's still the problem. And there was a very good discussion on a FIDIC discussion group on LinkedIn recently, where a guy came in and said, if this NEC is so bloody good, can you tell me why there's about 100, how many countries in the world, anybody know? 200 something? Something like that, 200 odd. How many countries is NEC really, really being used in? 4. England, South Africa, mandated in Hong Kong, a little bit in New Zealand. So if it's so bloody good, how comes there's other 196 countries that aren't using it yet? Is an argument that will go. And that's the challenge you'd have to make. And of course, the idea of taking NEC to a country where NEC hasn't been used would be difficult, as we know. Taking it to project finance would be difficult. Taking it to a project finance deal in Outer Mongolia, Richard, nice to hear from you, but bloody dream on, mate. That's the problem. But we've got to look ahead, guys. Look ahead. Wouldn't it be nice to take all our nice NEC stuff into that market where there are billions of pounds being spent? Questions? Any more for any more? Or I'll just get out of your way. They all agree. Do you all agree?
You're right.
I'm right. John says I'm right. That's the answer, isn't it? Brilliant. I'll leave you to it.
I've got one comment, Richard. Sorry, I'm not going to let you get away there, isn't it? I've got one comment.
Please.
And I think it's your starting point is fundamentally at odds with where most PPP projects start from.
Surely not.
Because they all start from the financing that comes from the bank, and the bank drives everything, and they have no interest whatsoever in the construction contract. The construction contract, the NEC is a complete afterthought in 90% plus of PPP projects.
Absolutely, but that's what I'm saying.
That on its head,
I mean, it's a massive task, but when you actually look at a project agreement, 90% of the words are about DBO. And there's a little bit about F, complex bits about F, don't get me wrong. But I'm not trying to say that my picture of a DBO project is wonderfully simplistic, because in reality there's hundreds of other contracts and guarantees and stuff knocking around. But for the core contract between authority and project company, it's DBO, O and F. Yes, you've got to take the lenders on board as well. We work as lenders technical advisors across the patch.
But it does depend on where you think the starting point is for a PPP or DBO contract. And if you talk to anyone in the finance sector, they will say the starting point and the ending point, frankly, is the financing, because all they're interested in is how much money do I put in and how much do I get out.
Absolutely,
but you're building a power plant.
Agree.
Completely irrelevant.
Agree totally, but you can't work that out unless you've done the feasibility and the backup for what's it going to cost to operate, what's it going to cost to build the thing that you're going to operate, for which you need a contract to provide a service and a contract to build it, I think. But I realise this is a little bit pie in the sky.
I think it sounds like a probing discussion about the last 5 to